Hey guys, what is up? AwesomeTheSauce here. Hope you guys are having a great day and welcome to a video where we're going to be going through Wizard101's latest update. Now this update is a really, there are some things like a new pack that I don't think is going to change much, but the real update in my opinion is the PvP hotfix. This affects all kinds of things. I'm going to be going fully over it so you're caught up with all the new things in Wiz, but just to give you an overview, we're going to be going over a crit and block update, we're going to be going over a massive shadow pip update, and we're also going to go through the dev diary so that we can see all the possible upcoming changes that are coming. And these things involve spells, treasure cards, maycasts, matchmaking, you name it, it's got it. So without further ado, let's get right in to what I think are some of the craziest new updates that we're going to see today. So this is a hotfix, which means a lot of the things that we experienced yesterday are going to be at least slightly different today. The biggest change is almost certainly going to be how shadow pips work. We're actually going to start off with that, even though it's not the first thing in the dev diary. This is really crazy. Basically, now your shadow rating is going to matter a lot more. This is actually, in my opinion, a pretty meaningful ice nerf, because what ice does, normally they use the cold rider set with the set bonus, and the meta is to just get 3 extra resist by rocking a pet like this and a wand like this. Now there's very few trade-offs for the Road Legend Skull. The only real problem with this, in my opinion, this wand, is that it just doesn't give shadow pip chance. Now how it used to be was that if someone had around, let's say, I think there's like around 109 shad chance, and they went against someone with a little bit more shad chance than that. Basically, the difference would be, let's say I ran 3 pieces of gear that gave me shad chance. Normally, this would be robe, boots, and hat, basically, right? If I wore that, if I went against someone with 4 pieces, if they had a wand with shad chance, apparently the odds that I, with my lower shad chance, outshadowed them, according to this dev diary, was 23%. So before this update, there was enough RNG in the game for someone to have one less piece of equipment that gave shad rating to outshad them, and the chances of that happening were 23%. Before, let's say someone had 20 more shad rating, right? Or I guess 20% more shad rating. I don't exactly know if it's simple adding and subtracting, or if it's a percent, whatever. If they had 120 versus 100, they would normally get a shad on the 4th round, and the second player with the 100 would normally get a shad in 5 rounds. However, 23% of the time, player B will get the shad, I guess, on the 4th round, and player A will get it on the 5th round. So now the after actually incorporates 2 different elements that are very important. Now, let's say you had that 20 shadow pip difference. The person with less shad chance, instead of 23% of the time outshading, they only outshad 2% of the time. That means an ice that's running Road Legend Skull will most certainly not outshad someone who's running more shads than them. It'll be a very rare thing, and it might actually keep a little bit of school identity for ice wizards that choose to use a Road Legend Skull to play super defensively. The other thing I really like is that now, they use that 120 shad rating versus 100 shad rating example as a before and after, right? Using that same example, while how it used to be was that on average, the person with 120 shad rating would get a shad in 4 rounds versus the person with 100 getting it in 5 rounds. Now, the person with 120 will get it in 5 rounds, and on average, the other person with the 100 shad rating will get it in 6 rounds. There's a lot of numbers, but really what the effect is that it's going to be a slight nerf on schools like Fire. Fire currently has an insane amount of damage for their HP. If you have decent shad rating, then you're in a really good spot if you get a furnace and a shad early, because you can literally pressure from the get-go. All this really does, it makes the beginning of the match just a little bit less shad reliant, and maybe you can make some moves that you don't just die very quickly without being able to react. I actually really like this because if you go second, I don't know if y'all knew this, I actually only figured this out recently. Even though we have a turn-based system, you start gaining shads on your off turn. So if you go second at the very beginning, then you start gaining shads in your shad gauge right away. What this 1 round delay basically does is that it lessens the effect of going second. So I think, honestly, if this doesn't mean anything for the meta, if this doesn't change anything, then probably the solution would be to make the 100 to 120 example operate on 7 versus 8 rounds. I have a feeling this will matter a lot. I don't think they would have to do that, especially because shad rating can actually go much higher than 100 or 120, but it is very exciting to see that right now, maybe the beginning of the game won't immediately be disastrous if you just get an early shad and an early furnace cast, for example. So not only is your actual Shad rating going to matter very, very much now in terms of how you out-Shad your opponent, it's also just going to be slightly slower meta-wise, and it's going to make it so that you don't just get a win right away from an early Shad. That being said, if you play offensively, you are now incentivized to run higher Shad rating right now than ever before. So if you don't have caramel gear, we're talking like gear like the Uber hat, you know, man? Like, if you compare the Dragoon hat with the Uber hat, what you'll notice is that the 4 extra Shad rating, while it might not have used to matter before, or it might have mattered less, it matters a lot more now. Honestly, I think if you can keep the Dragoon set bonus with the 3 Dragoon pieces, it's going to make a lot of sense to get as much Shad rating as possible. So that's going to be exciting. I genuinely think that this is going to make Uber gear a lot more meta, and it's probably going to make stats a lot more important. If you sacrifice stats for Shad rating, it might actually be worth it right now. I think the next really, really big change is the fact that they changed critical and block just a little bit more. Basically, what they did this time is that they increased the scalars of both crit and block. So what this basically means is that the frequency of your crit is just very, very high compared to how it was. Now, I know what you're thinking. That's stupid. What if Ice just crits everything? But there's kind of a bright side here. And this is actually a really, really big deal. I actually think that if we don't look at the numbers, if we don't focus on the numbers, it's not going to seem like a big deal. This is actually a really, really big deal. So right now, the meta revolves around 400 crit and 400 block. So for all intents and purposes, the numbers that they used in the dev diary, which is 400 crit and 400 block, are going to be pretty representative of how most matches go. Basically, let's say you had 400 crit and your opponent had 400 block, right? How it used to be before, with those numbers, you would crit 64% of the time, but when you did crit, the damage was 1.25. That's right, even if you had 400 block, the effect of the crit was still a 25% increase. Considering the frequency at which the crits were happening, whether it was 64% or not, it felt like everything was doing too much. Things like Fire Wizards always critting, especially when you think about a 25% multiplier on an already 150 damage. And on the other end of the aisle, schools like Ice, which only have 100 damage, getting a 25% boost every single time they crit. The effect of crit was making very offensive schools way too offensive and making very defensive schools simply overpowered. So now, what's gonna happen is if you're seeing the 400 crit versus 400 block, it's not going to happen 64% of the time with a 1.25 multiplier. It'll be a 70% frequency, which is almost the same. However, the multiplier is now going to be 1.11. That means that the effect in terms of damage of crit on the game is going to matter a lot less. And that's if you have 400 block. This makes 600 block setups basically almost negate crit completely. So now, if you really want to run a high block setup, there's going to be a reason. You basically negate crit pretty much completely. So you'll see a crit, and it genuinely should not matter. I don't know exactly what the numbers are going to be with like a 600 block setup. Although I also think that because of the Shad change, 600 block won't even, I don't think there's any block Shad chance and Pierce wands that people are going to rock, right? People are going to move towards Shad chance. But let's say even 500 block, right? If someone has the normal 400 crit and you have the 500 block, you're going to be looking at a less than 1.1 multiplier. This means that, yes, if you don't run block, there are consequences, but if you do run a lot of block, you can essentially eliminate the effect of crit in PvP. I honestly like this a lot more. I like the concept that block matters even when you don't actually physically block, right? I think that's one of the most important changes of late. It's just I have not been able to feel the effect simply because the frequency of critting and the effect of the multiplier were just too high. I honestly think this is going to be better. I don't know yet. We're going to have to check it out. But it's basically a pretty big nerf on more offensive schools like Fire. And it's honestly also a pretty big nerf on Ice, in my opinion, because they were just critting a lot. And they were getting a lot of free damage when they're running like 100 damage. So crit and Shad chance are definitely going to change some things in PvP, and I have a feeling the meta is going to shift just a little bit away from RNG, and that's really, really good. It's something that this meta desperately needs, and even if we don't feel it right away, I think it's a good direction. Now, this dev diary actually goes super in depth on a lot of things, so I'm going to leave it linked because covering all of them would be videos and videos worth of information. But some of the things on this dev diary are that they are going to look at matchmaking more, especially things like the level range. So instead of actually going against people in blocks of 50 levels, you're only going to be going against people in blocks of 10 levels, which means there could be mini metas at level 40, level 60, level 70. Added on to more promises of crit and shadow pip changes, we're also going to be looking at new spells, and what they're basically looking at, it seems, is restricting TCs based on level, which means, for example, a level 30 Ice Wizard isn't going to be able to use Lord of Winter as easily. And some TCs that seem to be spammed a lot are just going to become more trainable through spell elements, which might make a lot of sense, because let's say you look at spells like Brown Spider, they're very, very needed for life to even be competitive at max PvP, but they're simply just so rare as TCs that it's hard to get them. They're going to update Taunt and Pacify so that not just the caramel spells are going to use them. This is going to be especially important for minions that taunt, because minions that taunt will actually be, you'll have to target them, which means the storm minion could be very, very good compared to how it is now. And finally, they're going to do a spell audit that's going to go through Arc 1 spells, Arc 2 spells, and lore spells. So yeah, y'all, all in all, it's a pretty good direction for PvP. I'm going to be doing a lot of PvP on stream, so make sure you turn on your notifications, sub, and everything so you don't miss that content. Drop a like if you enjoyed, leave us a review, let me know what your opinions are in the comments below. I'd love to read all of them. And as always, if somebody hasn't told you you're awesome today, they doing something wrong, so stay awesome. And yeah, y'all.